My name is Lila, and just a few weeks ago, I graduated from high school. I'd been looking forward to starting a new chapter in life, one where I'd finally escape the shadow of my family's blatant favoritism. For as long as I can remember, my parents, Sarah and David Mitchell, have treated my older brother Jake like the center of their universe. Jake is 7 years older than me, and he's always been the golden child. Growing up, if Jake so much as mentioned an interest in something, my parents would bend over backward to make it happen. When he wanted to try hockey, they bought him the best gear money could buy. When he dabbled in drawing, they gifted him the most expensive art supplies. Skateboarding, he got a custom-made board. It didn't matter that Jake got bored and quit every hobby after a few months. They always supported his whims without hesitation. Then, there was me. My birthdays were forgettable affairs. A small cake, maybe a new shirt or school supplies if I was lucky. One Christmas, when I was 9, stands out in my memory. Jake had just turned 16 a week earlier, and my parents had bought him a high-end gaming computer for his birthday. When Christmas morning arrived, all I got was a card that said, "Merry Christmas. Sorry, we ran out of money this year." That was the reality of my childhood. Jake's every want fulfilled while I got the leftovers, if there were any. So, you can imagine my shock when, just days after my high school graduation, my parents sat me down in the living room, with excited smiles plastered on their faces. "Lila," Mum began, smoothing her shirt in that overly casual way she does when she's nervous. "We've been thinking, you're turning 18 soon and that's a big milestone. We want to throw you a proper party." I nearly choked on my coffee. "A party?" I repeated, sure I'd misheard. "Yes," Dad chimed in, nodding enthusiastically. "We'll invite the whole family and make it a real celebration." I stared at them, trying to figure out what the catch was. They've never been the type to suddenly change their ways, and throwing me a party was so out of character that it set off every alarm bell in my head. "Why now?" I asked, unable to hide my suspicion. "You've never wanted to throw me a party before." Mom waved a hand dismissively. "Well, you've just graduated high school and are heading off to college. It's different now. You're becoming an adult." I nodded slowly, still unconvinced. Something about their overly enthusiastic tone felt forced, but I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me. Over the next few days, I tried to set my doubts aside and focus on the idea that maybe, just maybe, this party was their way of finally recognizing me. I even started to feel a little excited. Mum was busy on the phone, making arrangements and ordering a fancy cake, while Dad spruced up the backyard. But then, 2 days before the party, I overheard them talking in the kitchen late at night. "David, are you sure this will work?" Mum's voice was low and anxious. "It has to," Dad replied. "Your mother's been on our case about how we treat Lila compared to Jake. If we don't impress her, she might cut us off financially." I froze, their words sinking in like lead. Suddenly, everything made sense. The sudden interest in my birthday, the elaborate party plans. It wasn't about me at all. It was about convincing Grandma Eleanor, who'd always seen through their favoritism, that they treated their children equally. My heart sank as I sat on the stairs, trying to process the revelation. For the first time, I thought this might be my moment to shine in their eyes. But it wasn't about celebrating me. It was about keeping Grandma's financial support intact. I didn't say anything that night, but a bitter mix of disappointment and anger began to simmer inside me. I decided I'd go through with the party, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them use me as a pawn without a fight. The day of the party arrived, and I did my best to shove my disappointment aside and focus on making it through. Grandma Eleanor had arrived early, her practical Toyota Camry parked in our driveway, and seeing her warm, genuine smile made me feel like I wasn't completely invisible in my own family. "Oh, Lila, you look so grown up," she said, pulling me into a tight hug as soon as I greeted her. She smelled like lavender soap and cookies, and her presence instantly made me feel a little better. "I'm so proud of you. A high school graduate, heading off to college. You've got a bright future ahead, sweetheart." "Thanks, Grandma," I said, smiling as she squeezed my hand. By mid-afternoon, the backyard was buzzing with guests. Relatives and family friends mingled. The smell of grilled food wafted through the air, and the chatter of conversation filled the space. Mum was flitting around like a perfect hostess, making sure everyone had drinks and food, while Dad manned the grill with a forced enthusiasm I recognized all too well. But it didn't take long for their true motives to shine through. They hovered around Grandma Eleanor, like bees around honey. "Mum, you look amazing," Mum gushed, refilling Grandma's glass the moment it was half empty. "We're so happy you could be here. Lila's been so excited to share her big day with you." I sat at a nearby table, quietly fuming as I watched them lay it on thick. The party wasn't about me at all. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated show to prove to Grandma Eleanor that they were doting, attentive parents. The final straw came during dinner. Grandma, as always, turned her attention to me. "So, Lila, tell me about your plans for college. Are you all set for the fall?" I hesitated, glancing at my parents. "Well, I've been accepted to 2 schools," I began, State University offered me a full scholarship, and Brington College also accepted me. But Brington's tuition is $25,000 a year, so— "Oh, Brington is wonderful," Grandma exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "I know a few people who went there. It's an excellent school." I nodded, forcing a smile. "It's my dream school, but the cost is—" Mum cut in, her voice unnaturally bright. "But Lila is so practical. She knows state is a great option, especially with the scholarship." Dad nodded. "She's always been responsible, just like we taught her." The way they spoke about me, as if I weren't even there, made my stomach churn. I clenched my hands under the table, swallowing the retort I desperately wanted to throw at them. As the party continued, I tried to focus on my friends and cousins, but I couldn't shake the growing frustration. Mum kept whispering to Grandma, occasionally glancing at me and smiling, like she'd just won a prize. Dad, meanwhile, lingered around Grandma like a nervous puppy, ready to fetch her another drink or refill her plate at a moment's notice. By the time the cake was cut, I'd had enough. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, I finally confronted my parents. "Can we talk?" I asked, finding them in the kitchen cleaning up. "Of course, sweetheart," Mum said, her cheerful tone grating on my nerves. I folded my arms, my heart pounding. "This party wasn't for me, was it? It was for Grandma. To impress her. To make sure she keeps giving you money." The way their faces froze told me everything I needed to know. "Lila, that's not fair," Dad said, his voice low. "We wanted to celebrate you and—" "No," I interrupted. "You wanted to look good for Grandma. You didn't care about my birthday before. Why now?" They exchanged a glance, and Mum sighed. "Sweetheart, we've been under a lot of financial pressure. Grandma's support is important to us, and I'm just part of the performance." I finished for her, my voice shaking. "You're blowing this out of proportion," Dad snapped. "You should be grateful we threw you a party at all." Grateful. That word hit me like a slap. "You don't get it," I said quietly, "and you never will." I turned and walked away, leaving them in stunned silence. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I couldn't keep living in their shadow. It was time to start putting myself first. It all came to a head 2 days after the party. I had just gotten home from running errands when I saw my parents and Jake sitting in the living room, their faces serious. Mom patted the spot on the couch next to her, but something about the way she avoided my eyes made my stomach twist. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously, standing in the doorway. "Lila," Dad began, folding his hands in that faux serious way he always did when trying to make something sound reasonable. "We need to have a family discussion." I stayed where I was. "About what?" Jake shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable for once. His usually smug expression had been replaced with a nervous one, but I could tell he was working up to something. Mom took a deep breath and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Sweetheart, you know your brother has been having a tough time with his business." I blinked, caught off guard. "What does Jake's business have to do with me?" "Well," Dad said, his voice careful, "Jake's run into some financial trouble. The bank is threatening to repossess his assets, and if that happens, he'll lose everything he's worked for. We're all very concerned." I crossed my arms, already sensing where this was going. "And we think," Mom said gently, "that the money Grandma gave you could help Jake get back on his feet. It's a temporary setback, and this would give him the chance to bounce back." I stared at them, stunned. "You're asking me to give Jake my college fund? The money Grandma specifically gave me?" Jake, emboldened now, leaned forward. "It's not like you need it all, Lila. You got a full ride to state. You could still go there and save Grandma's money for later. Or in this case, for me." I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. "Are you kidding me?" "Lila, don't overreact," Dad said, his tone sharp. "Family helps family. We've taught you that from the beginning." "Family helps family," I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean family helps Jake? It's always been about Jake. You've never cared about my dreams or my future. This money is the one thing that's mine, and now you want to take it." "Don't be selfish," Mom said, her tone icy now. "Your brother is in a real crisis, and we're asking you to step up and do what's right for this family." "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking with anger. "That money is for my education, not to bail Jake out of his bad decisions." Jake scoffed. "Oh, come on, Lila. You're acting like this is the end of the world. My business is established. Helping me makes more sense than wasting money on some overpriced degree you might not even use." The audacity of his words made my blood boil. "This isn't about what makes sense to you. This is about me for once in my life. I'm not giving you the money, and that's final." Dad slammed his hand on the coffee table, making me jump. "Enough. You're acting like a spoiled brat. If you don't hand over that money, don't expect to live under this roof anymore." The ultimatum hit me like a punch to the gut, but instead of backing down, I felt something inside me snap. "Fine," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I don't need to live here." I stormed upstairs, my mind racing as I grabbed a duffel bag and began shoving clothes, documents, and essentials into it. The anger coursing through me was stronger than the sadness or fear that tried to creep in. I was done being manipulated. As I walked down the stairs with my bag slung over my shoulder, my parents and Jake watched in silence. "Where are you going?" Mum demanded. "To someone who actually cares about me," I replied, walking out the door without looking back. It wasn't until I was on the train to Grandma Eleanor's house, clutching the check she gave me and my documents in my lap, that the weight of it all hit me. I was terrified, but for the first time I felt free. The train ride to Grandma Eleanor's house felt like the longest of my life. I stared out the window, my duffel bag clutched tightly in my lap, my heart pounding with a mix of anger, sadness, and fear. I kept replaying the confrontation with my parents and Jake in my head, trying to make sense of how they could justify taking something so personal, so important, away from me. When I arrived at Grandma's, she opened the door with her usual warm smile, but her expression quickly shifted to concern when she saw my tear-streaked face and the bag slung over my shoulder. "Lila, what happened?" she asked, pulling me into a hug. I let it all spill out. The party, the overheard conversation, their demand for my college fund, and the ultimatum that drove me out the door. As I spoke, Grandma's face hardened, her eyes blazing with the kind of fury I'd never seen before. "They threatened to disown you over Jake's mistakes," she repeated, her voice trembling with anger. "That's unbelievable." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I didn't know what else to do, Grandma. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't let them take the money you gave me." She put a hand on my shoulder, her voice softening. "You did the right thing, sweetheart. You stood up for yourself, and I'm proud of you for that. You're staying here with me until it's time for college. No arguments." Relief washed over me, and for the first time that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. The fallout from my decision was swift. The next morning I woke to a barrage of missed calls and texts from my parents and Jake. "Mom, Lila, you're being ridiculous. Come home now and stop this nonsense." "Dad, you're throwing away your family for what?" "Money. You'll regret this." "Jake, unbelievable. You'd let me lose everything just to be selfish." "Real nice, Lila." I ignored them, my stomach twisting with a mix of guilt and defiance. Grandma, sensing my hesitation, placed a hand on mine. "Don't let them manipulate you, Lila. You deserve to have your own life, free from their control." Despite her reassurance, the guilt lingered. It was hard to shake the voice in my head telling me I was abandoning my family, but then I remembered all the times they'd abandoned me. Every birthday forgotten, every achievement overshadowed by Jake's whims, every time I was told to be grateful for crumbs. Over the next few weeks, I focused on preparing for college. Grandma helped me get everything in order, from dorm supplies to budgeting advice. Living with her was a breath of fresh air. She treated me like an adult, an equal, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. The calls and messages from my parents eventually tapered off, replaced by occasional updates from my cousin Jackie. She told me that Jake had officially moved back in with my parents, and that they were scrambling to cover his debts, even taking out a second mortgage on the house. "It's a mess," Jackie admitted during one call. "They're still trying to guilt people into helping, but no one's biting. Honestly, good for you for getting out when you did." Her words solidified my resolve. I wasn't responsible for fixing their mistakes or cleaning up Jake's messes. By the time I moved into my dorm at Brington College, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't thought possible. My roommate Sarah was friendly, my classes were challenging but fascinating, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something for myself. One evening, as I sat in the library studying, my phone buzzed with a text from my mum. "Mom, we need to talk. Please call me." I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. I wasn't ready to go back, not yet, and maybe not ever. This was my time to focus on me, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away. The months after I moved into Brington College flew by in a whirlwind of new experiences. At first, I felt like I was constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next message or call from my family. But as time passed and my phone stayed silent, I started to breathe easier. It was strange, living without their constant presence in my life, but it was also liberating. I threw myself into my classes, which were every bit as challenging as I'd hoped. The professors at Brington were brilliant, and I found myself thriving in an environment where my hard work and intelligence were actually recognized and rewarded. I made friends, real friends who didn't see me as an afterthought or a backup plan. My roommate Sarah quickly became my confidant, and we spent countless late nights talking about everything from our dreams for the future to our messy families. Grandma Eleanor was my rock through it all. She called regularly, checking in on me and offering advice. During my first semester, she even came to visit, bringing homemade blueberry muffins and a care package that included everything from laundry detergent to fuzzy socks. Sitting with her in my dorm room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. "Do you regret it?" I asked her one evening as we sat in the campus coffee shop. "Cutting off Mom and Dad, I mean." She sipped her tea thoughtfully before answering. "Not for a second," she said. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for people is let them face the consequences of their actions. Your parents have always chosen to prioritize Jake, and now they're reaping what they've sown. You can love someone and still choose to walk away, Lila. Never forget that. Her words stuck with me, especially when Jackie called with updates from home. Jake's business had officially gone under, and my parents were still trying to dig themselves out of the financial hole they'd created. They'd even started selling off family heirlooms to cover the debts. "They're still blaming you, Jackie said during one call. "Mom said Aunt Sarah told her you abandoned your family for some fancy college." I sighed, but this time, it didn't hurt as much. "They'll never see it any other way," I said, "and that's okay. I'm done trying to change their minds." By the end of my first year at Brington, I'd secured an internship at a prestigious company in the city and maintained a 4.0 GPA. More importantly, I felt like I was finally living for myself. My days were filled with classes, work, and friendships, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel overshadowed or undervalued. The last time I spoke to my parents was during the summer after my first year. They called saying they wanted to talk about rebuilding the relationship. But it quickly became clear that their idea of reconciliation involved me convincing Grandma to reopen her wallet. "I'm not going to do that," I told them firmly. "If you want to fix things with Grandma, that's between you and her. But I'm done being a middleman, and I'm done being taken for granted." They didn't take it well, and the conversation ended in angry words. But this time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Now, as I sit in my dorm room planning for my second year at Brington, I feel a deep sense of relief and pride. Walking away from my family wasn't easy, but it was the best decision I've ever made. The biggest lesson I've learned is that self-respect is non-negotiable. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them take advantage of you, and family isn't an excuse to sacrifice your happiness. This is my story, and for the first time, I'm the one writing it. Story 2. Life's been a roller coaster lately, and honestly, I feel like I'm stuck in a nightmare I can't wake up from. It all started when my dad remarried. I'm Jason, 17, and I never thought things could get this complicated. My mum passed away when I was 10. Cancer. It was rough, and my dad, who's 45 now, didn't handle it well. He threw himself into work, and I was just a kid, lost and confused. The only person I could rely on was my older brother, Ryan. He's 22 now, but back then, he was basically my parent. He'd make breakfast, help with homework, and always knew how to make me laugh. We became super close, and for a while, it felt like we had each other's backs, no matter what. A couple of years later, Carla entered the picture. She's 40, works with my dad, and came into our lives not long after her divorce. She's got a daughter, Molly, just a year younger than me. I was cautious at first, but I wasn't completely against the idea. I thought maybe having someone around could make things better for my dad. I was wrong. Things went downhill fast. Within 6 months, they were engaged. It felt like I blinked, and suddenly my dad was planning a wedding. I remember standing there in that fancy suit, watching two people I barely knew become family. The whole day was weird. Ryan saw I wasn't feeling it, so he spent the entire reception making goofy faces at me from across the room to cheer me up. That's when Carla really started to show her true colours. She wasn't happy about Ryan's antics, and pulled him aside, telling him he needed to act more appropriate. Like, really, he was just trying to make me feel better. Living with Carla and Molly after that was rough. Carla was nothing like my mum. She was strict, always making up rules about everything. Curfews, chores, even how I should dress. Molly was cool with it. But for me, it was suffocating. I missed how things used to be, where life was more relaxed, and Ryan would come by to hang out. Thank God for Ryan, though. He didn't disappear when Carla moved in. He'd still come over, usually with some prank or joke to lighten the mood. One time, he showed up in a full-on Superman costume, claiming he was there to rescue me from the evil stepmother. I was dying laughing, but of course Carla wasn't. She got so pissed, saying it was disrespectful, and that Ryan was undermining her authority. That's when things started to get really tense. Carla didn't like how close Ryan and I were. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how unhealthy it was for siblings to be that close, saying I needed to grow up and stop relying on him so much. Dad tried to play mediator, but he was useless. He'd defend me at first, but the second Carla pushed back, he'd fold. It was like he was too scared to stand up to her. Every time I looked at him, I could see that internal struggle, like he was torn between his wife and his kids. And it hurt, man. It hurt to see that he might actually choose her over us. The breaking point came during our Labor Day BBQ. This BBQ is a huge tradition for our family. My mum started it years ago, and it's always been a big deal. Friends, family, the whole shebang. Ryan had just moved back home after graduating college, and I was psyched to have him around more. We were all hanging out by the pool, and I decided to sneak up on Ryan and push him in. It's a game we've been playing since we were little. He came up laughing, grabbed my ankle and pulled me in after him. We were both dying laughing, just like old times. But of course, Carla had to ruin it. She stormed over, yelling at Ryan, saying he could have hurt me and that he was being irresponsible. I tried to explain that it was my idea, but she wasn't having it. Then she turned on me, saying I was too old for this kind of behaviour and needed to grow up. By this point, everyone was watching, and I was mortified. I just snapped. I told Carla to mind her own business, and that she had no right to dictate how Ryan and I acted with each other. The entire backyard went silent. I had never spoken to her like that before, and everyone looked shocked. Dad stepped in, trying to calm things down, but the damage was already done. That night, Dad came to my room, telling me I needed to apologize to Carla. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him straight up that Carla was the one who overreacted. I reminded him of all the times she'd tried to come between Ryan and me, all the times she'd criticized us, and how she constantly made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. I asked him why he never stood up for us, why he always let her push us around. He didn't have an answer. He just looked at me, hurt and disappointed, and said I was being unfair. I was done at that point. I told Dad I wasn't going to apologize until Carla did first. He left without saying anything else, and now the house felt like a battlefield. Carla wouldn't talk to me directly, only through Dad or Molly. Ryan felt guilty and hadn't come over since the BBQ. And Molly was trying to play peacemaker, but she didn't get it. She'd never had to deal with a new parent being shoved into her life and making her feel like an outsider in her own family. And that's where I'm at now. Feeling stuck, lost, and not sure what to do next. The aftermath of the BBQ blow-up was even worse than I expected. Carla barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was through gritted teeth. Molly kept pushing that, "Can't we all just get along" vibe, which was seriously getting on my nerves. I get she's used to this structured, perfect life, but that's not how I roll. I figured Ryan would step in, like he always has. But guess what? He stopped coming over. Completely. I didn't get it at first. I was texting, calling, but he kept brushing me off. Finally, I cornered him on the phone and asked what the hell was going on. That's when he dropped the bomb. Carla had sent him this long-ass text about how he was disrupting the family and setting a bad example. She basically blamed him for everything. I could hear the guilt in his voice as he told me he thought it'd be better if he stayed away for a while. Seriously, I couldn't believe he was backing down. I told him that's exactly what Carla wanted, to drive a wedge between us. But Ryan's always been the peacekeeper, and I guess he thought this was his way of making things easier. He begged me not to confront Carla about it, said it'd only make things worse. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, and honestly, it scared me. My brother, the guy who always stood up for me, was just tired. I hung up feeling more alone than ever. The one person I could always count on had basically checked out. So I started keeping to myself more, staying in my room, avoiding Carla and Dad. I knew if I tried to talk to Dad, it'd just turn into another lecture about respecting Carla. Then came the new house rules. Carla must have been feeling real empowered after getting Ryan out of the picture, because she laid down a bunch of new rules that were clearly aimed at me. First, she decided I needed a curfew. 9 p.m. on weeknights, 10 p.m. on weekends. Like I'm 12, not 17. And here's the kicker. Molly didn't get a curfew. When I pointed out how unfair that was, Carla said it was because Molly had proven she was responsible, and I hadn't. Oh, and she started checking my phone. Not in a casual way, but full-on monitoring my usage. She even threatened to take away my car privileges if I didn't start showing more respect. And the worst part. Dad just sat there nodding along like a puppet. He didn't seem to agree with her, but he wasn't going to disagree either. It was like every time Carla pushed, Dad caved, and I felt more and more isolated. The breaking point came when I overheard them arguing about me one night. Carla was saying it would be best if I went to live with my grandparents for a while. To learn some discipline. She even brought up how her parents sent her to live with an aunt during her rebellious phase, and how it straightened her out. I was furious. I felt like I was being pushed out of my own home just because I wasn't fitting into Carla's perfect little family plan. And the worst part, Dad wasn't fully against the idea. He wasn't all in, but he wasn't shutting it down either. That hurt more than anything. After everything we'd been through, after losing Mum and trying to rebuild our lives, he was just going to let Carla push me away like that. I felt trapped. I couldn't talk to Dad, and Ryan had bailed. Molly was trying to play it cool, but she didn't get it. She'd never had to deal with losing a parent, or suddenly having a new one forced into her life. This was normal for her, but for me, it felt like I was losing everything all over again. That's when I started thinking about moving in with Ryan. He'd offered before, but I didn't take it seriously until now. The thought of leaving Dad behind tore me up inside, but I couldn't keep living like this. I felt like I was suffocating. I spent a lot of time thinking about Mom during all this. I'd sit in my room looking at old photos. There was one picture that always stood out. Me, Ryan, Dad, and Mom at the beach. I was on Dad's shoulders, and Mom was laughing while Ryan made a goofy face. We looked so happy back then, like nothing could ever break us apart. But here we were, broken. I wonder what Mom would say if she saw us now. Would she tell me to try harder with Carla? Would she understand why I couldn't? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. So I made a decision. I packed a bag, grabbed that photo album and called Ryan. That was it. I was done trying to make things work with Carla and Dad. If they couldn't see what was happening, then I couldn't stick around to watch them ruin what little family we had left. Staying with Ryan was weird. Relieved, yeah, but weird. No more walking on eggshells around Carla or listening to her stupid rules. I could actually breathe. Ryan's apartment wasn't anything fancy. Small, a little messy, but it felt more like home than Dad's place had in a long time. The first few days were chill. Ryan didn't pressure me to talk, and we just hung out like we used to. But reality started creeping back in. School, friends, explaining this whole mess. And Dad. He hadn't stopped texting and calling since I left. At first, I ignored it. I didn't want to deal with him, or hear another one of his lame excuses about how I should respect Carla. But after a while, the guilt started creeping in. I missed him. Despite everything, he was still my dad. So one night, after Ryan had gone to bed, I scrolled through all the missed calls and messages. Dozens of them, most saying the same thing. Come home, we can talk this out. He apologized, said he didn't mean to hurt me, that he didn't realize how bad things had gotten. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut, because a part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he would stand up to Carla and that we could fix everything, but another part of me knew better. He'd been choosing her over me for years now. Why would it be any different this time? I decided to call him back. It was late, and I didn't know if he'd even pick up. He answered on the second ring, his voice tired but hopeful. We exchanged some awkward small talk. Then he dove right in. "I'm sorry, Jason," he said, his voice cracking. "I never meant for things to get this bad. I just didn't know how to handle it. I wanted to be mad, but hearing him like that made it hard. He sounded like the dad I used to know, the one who actually cared, but I wasn't about to let him off that easy. "You let her push me out, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been letting her control everything for years. It's like I don't even matter anymore." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost hear him thinking. "That's not true, Jason," he finally said. "You matter more than anything. I didn't realize how much Carla's been pushing you away. I thought we could make this family work." That hit me hard. I wanted to believe him, but something inside me just wouldn't let it go. "Then why didn't you stand up for me? Why did you let her treat me like crap?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. "You always took her side, Dad. Always," he sighed. "I was scared, Jason. After your mom died, I didn't know how to do this on my own. When Carla came into my life, it felt like a second chance, a chance to rebuild, but I never wanted to lose you in the process." I didn't know what to say to that. I'd never heard Dad sound so vulnerable before, but at the same time, I couldn't just forgive him. "Not yet. I don't know if I can come back, Dad," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not with her still there." "I get it," he said, and I could hear the sadness in his voice. "But can we at least try, please?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say yes and go back to how things used to be, but I knew that wasn't possible. Things were too messed up now. "I'll think about it," I told him, and before he could say anything else, I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Was I being too hard on Dad? Should I give him another chance? Or was I right to stay away? I didn't know anymore. The next day, Ryan noticed something was off. We were eating breakfast when he finally asked, "You okay, man?" I shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." "I talked to Dad last night." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "And? He wants me to come back," I said, staring at my cereal. "He apologized. Said he didn't realize how bad things were." Ryan didn't say anything at first. "Do you believe him?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Did I believe Dad? Part of me did, but another part just couldn't forget how he'd let things get this bad. "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to, but Carla's still there," Ryan finished for me. I nodded. Ryan sighed. "Look, man, I get it. I know you miss Dad, and I know you want things to be different. But if you go back and nothing changes, you're just going to end up right back where you started." He was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. For the next few days, I kept going back and forth. I'd get a text from Dad, and it would make me want to go back home. But then I'd remember all the crap I'd been dealing with, and I'd change my mind again. Finally, after about a week of indecision, I decided to have one last talk with Dad. Not at the house, though. I wasn't ready to face Carla yet. I texted him to meet me at the park where we used to go when I was a kid. It felt like neutral ground. When Dad showed up, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. For a second I felt guilty, but then I reminded myself that this wasn't all my fault. We sat on one of the old benches, neither of us saying anything at first. Finally, Dad broke the silence. "I've missed you, Jason," he said, his voice soft. "I've missed you too, Dad," I admitted. "But I don't know if I can come back. Not with how things are." He nodded like he'd expected that. "I get it, but I want you to know I'm trying. I talked to Carla. I told her things need to change." That surprised me. "What did she say?" "She wasn't happy about it," he said with a slight smile. "But I don't care. You're my son, Jason. I can't lose you." Hearing that made something shift inside me. Maybe there was a chance to fix things after all. But I still wasn't sure if it was enough. I just need some time, I told him. And for the first time, Dad didn't push. He just nodded and said, take all the time you need.